And I said no. And my husband heard, and he came in the room and he's like, did you just say no to interviewing RBG? And everyone truly, at the end of the day, I believe, just wants to be heard. And I also think that's at the core of a lot of our political divide. We're not listening to each other. I regret them. I regret them because I thought in the moment that I was doing the right thing for the viewer. I'm not saying I asked the wrong questions. I stand by the questions I ask, but I do think there are times when I could have asked them much differently. I think I was always curious, which is key to a great interview and being a great journalist. But I think the biggest mistake I made early on in my career that I've worked on and continue to work on is that I would try to prove to the audience that I knew everything. I was moderating CNN presidential town hall with Howard Schultz, and Jeff looked at me right before the interview and he said, Poppy, remember, you can ask anything with a smile.
Welcome to More to Say. I'm Amber Vinsbox, founder of the $2 billion creator commerce platform, LTK. I've spent the last 14 years pioneering the creator economy, and on this podcast, I'm giving you direct access to the knowledge and perspectives of some of today's most influential people. I want you to stay ahead of the curve, so pull up a seat because we are just getting started. Today, we have a very special guest who has mastered the art of the conversation. My friend Poppy Harlow, who you might know from her multiple decades on CNN as a host. She's an author, she's a storyteller, and she's interviewed some of the most consequential world leaders, both in business and politics and beyond. We're looking at leaders like Justin Trudeau, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Warren Buffett, Jay-Z. The list goes on. She's interviewed all of them and built a strong rapport with them because of her interview style and relationship building. I wanted to have Poppy on here today so that she can share some of those skills that she's honed in over the last 2 decades so that we can apply them to our own lives to have more successful interactions. Please listen to this episode. I have personally been so empowered by what she's shared, and I know that this is something that regardless of age or professional status, we all need to use and apply to our lives. I am so proud to have my friend Poppy with us here today. Poppy and I met in 2019, and on the night that we met, we were in this casual cocktail environment. And there was about 20 of us there. There was this elder man who was the guest of honor, and he was instrumental in putting together the Henry Crown Fellowship that we were a part of. And Poppy, in the middle of this event, was asked, will you interview him? And I remember she was absolutely, and grabbed 2 stools and set it right down. And this man who she had been in the room with for all of 15 seconds, she was able to interview him and do it so fluently and have such an interesting conversation. And I had never seen anything like that before. We're just like on the spot with no research, not knowing this person, that she was able to draw out just such interesting information. You would have thought that they were like best friends and she'd known him her whole life. And I was just so impressed by this and thought that's a skill that I would love to have both professionally, personally, to be so interesting and to be able to draw out even such favor from someone, honestly, like he was loving the conversation as well. And then in the last few months, I came across this quote that's credited to Eleanor Roosevelt. And it says, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. And that was like kind of a knife through the heart, honestly, because I started reflecting on my conversations. I love to host dinner parties at the ranch, or, when I come back to town, I will have, dinner with friends or meet up with them. And I started reflecting of what types of conversations am I having and with whom? And it really made me think a lot about the difference in my experience between the people that I can have these conversations where we're discussing ideas versus the people that I sit and discuss events versus the people where we sit and we discuss people and we aren't able to transcend that. And it also made me reflect that I really make more time for people when we are discussing events. It gets pretty boring really quickly to discuss people. And it does, now that I understand this and have come across this concept, it just feels a little bit like base and not the way that I want to spend my time. what I think so interesting about this is like, now that I've acknowledged it, it's a skill that I want to develop, and I think we can all develop. And, you know, there's a mindfulness there. It's knowing's the first step, then equipping. So of course, Poppy and I have known each other for many years. I've seen her both in real life, on air. You know her from her many years hosting as over at CNN. So I asked Poppy to join me and give us a masterclass in creating conversations that really elevate our social experiences and our relationships. Poppy, you've had such an impressive career in journalism. Will you tell us a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to pursue this career?
Of course. First of all, it's such a joy to be here on the other side of the camera. Usually I'm the ones asking the questions, but such a joy to be here in your presence with a dear friend who I have learned so much from, admire so deeply for the leader you are, obviously, but the mother you are, the wife you are, the human you are. And I'm grateful for this friendship, and I'm grateful to be with you today. So my journey to journalism and interviewing was, I think like so many careers, sort of not planned. I was going to go to law school. I was going to be a litigator like my father. He died when I was 15, as you know, and so I wanted to sort of do everything like him. I thought I'd get into the top law schools, had straight A's in college, and got rejected from every single top law school. I don't like standardized tests like the LSAT. And it was such a blessing. I cried. I thought my career was ruined. But I had been interning all through college because I went to school in New York City. So I'd been interning at CBS News. And so I had 3 years under my belt there. And so I thought, okay, well, now I'm going to try to stay in news, I guess, and apply to law school again next year. I was lucky enough to get hired at CBS NewsPath, which is like the distributor of content to the local affiliates. I made $28,000 a year. I somehow survived on that in New York City, which is a whole other discussion about what we need to do about wages for folks. But like, it was a dream job. And so I guess the moral of the story is, you know, I've been following this a lot lately. Listen to the universe, listen to the whispers, and, you know, no can also be yes to something greater.
Did you start out there being on camera or?
No. You know what my job was? It was basically running across the street to the tape library. I'm so old that there were beta tapes, which are yellow, actual like VHS tapes of video content for our local affiliates in the US, but also like our Japanese affiliate or France or the UK. They would ask for, we need video of when this event happened like 20 years ago. So I'd run across the street, search this enormous library of tapes, pull the tape out, bring it back, transcribe it, which is just a fancy way of saying listen and type down every single thing you hear. There was no AI, there was no automated any of that, and send it to the affiliates. And that was my job. It was not fancy. But to get on camera, they needed someone to work like nights and weekends to go to movie premieres in New York City and interview the celebrities. I'm like, I'll do that. Why doesn't everyone want to do that? So I was behind the camera interviewing them, but then I would ask the nice photographers after we're done, do you mind taping like a little bit of me trying to report here? And so slowly I built up a reel at CBS by doing the work that other people didn't want to do.
That's incredible. And I love the way that you just took initiative and said, hey,
you have to.
I've had friends, of course, that I think many people want to be in broadcast journalism. And obviously very, very few get to be on air, even in the smaller markets.
Yeah.
You start out in New York City. I think that's true of even I see that at LTK, where there are people that have risen through the ranks because of their hard work. They're doing the job they're not being paid to do. And we always say, whenever you're getting a promotion, you're already actually acting at that level. And that's what I'm heaaring from you is I was actually already doing the work before I even was like called up to be asked to do it.
Yeah.
So now, like fast forward, you are an award-winning journalist and a phenomenal interviewer. Mm-hmm. To jump right to it, like what do you think are like the key components of having a great conversation?
It's such a good question. And I'm so glad this is the topic of the conversation because it is a skill that you need to hone. Even if you're a broadcast journalist on air like I am, I have learned through the years to be a better interviewer. I was not a great interviewer at the beginning. I think I was always curious, which is key to a great interview and being a great journalist. But I think the biggest mistake I made early on in my career that I've worked on and continue to work on is that I would try to prove to the audience that I knew everything, that I had done all my homework. And I think especially coming into CNN, I was really young, like 25 maybe, and had like kind of a weird name. I was from Minnesota. I had no Rolodex, like I wasn't connected. And so I was like, I'm going to have everyone like take me seriously. So I'd be asking these amazing CEOs or leaders questions. The question would be like 2 minutes long because I was going to rattle off every single thing I knew about them or the question or what they'd done. And it gave them nothing to answer. And I was trying to prove to the world that I was smart enough or that I was enough. If you watch masterful interviewers like Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, her questions are so short. Her curiosity comes through and she's genuinely asking the question. She's not trying to show the audience anything. And so I still have days when I ask questions that are too long or I throw too much information out there. But that is, I think, key, is be genuinely curious. And like brevity is powerful.
It's interesting that that's the first thing you go to because I see it in the workplace, for example. Baxter is much more of a master at asking a question he knows the answer to because he wants to hear someone else's version or he needs them to say it out loud. It's definitely a tool that leaders use. And I have historically struggled to ask a question that I know the answer to. And it's either because I've done so much prep or I've already formed my opinion. And so I love that you point that out. The other thing that I've read is that people perceive that a conversation or interaction was successful or enjoyable when they spoke the majority of the time, which is just kind of an interesting theory that you can apply to work and life. Like I woke up this morning, I'll be honest. So I was at a dinner last night with 2 people I know very well and 1 person I just met. And I was so excited to see the people that I do know. I totally dominated the conversation. I was talking nonstop. And then this morning I woke up and I was thinking about all the things we talked about. And I was like, oh my gosh, I have such heartache I totally shut that other person out. I talked way too much. I didn't include them in the conversation. And it was just sort of that next day of processing, which I think is part of growing.
It's also human, Amber. I've done that so many times. But now for next time. Like that's when I do that, I think. So
yeah, don't
beat yourself up.
It's funny. You can even now, we do a lot of video calls. And so, and it's tougher, I guess, in a professional environment because someone is usually leading the conversation. But if you think of it as like a closed caption, like who is actually speaking the most when you reflect back on your interactions with people, if you spoke more, they're going to have a lower impression of like how wonderful the engagement was.
That's so interesting.
Was there a mentor or a resource or anything that you used to study? I know right now, Baxter, again, is like, why are you spending all your time on this? But I've been trying to watch great interviewers just to like kind of learn from their skill set. For me, I have to see someone else do it. But how did you learn?
First of all, I love Baxter, but I think keep spending time on this because you've already honed a lot of your great business skills. But communication is actually like everything in business. I mean, in politics, in life, in friendship, in relationships, in business, communication is everything. And I think it's like a really great place to spend your time. For me, it was watching the greats. So I mentioned Leslie Stahl, for example, at 60 Minutes, or Scott Pelley, or can you tell I love 60 Minutes, or Jane Pauley, or my good friend Savannah Guthrie. There is a couple of things. One thing that my former boss at CNN, Jeff Zucker, who was and is such a great leader, told me. He flew down to Houston. I was moderating CNN presidential town hall with Howard Schultz, who was the CEO of Starbucks, who was considering a run for president. And I knew that I was going to ask some difficult questions. And Jeff looked at me right before the interview. And he said, Poppy, remember, you can ask anything with a smile. And that doesn't even mean a literal smile. What that means is difficult questions don't need to be confrontational or contentious. it's about sort of the smile in your eyes and the goodwill and respect and empathy in your heart. And I think if you go into any conversation or interview like that, you're going to come out on the right side. And I'll never forget that. And that changed the way that I think about difficult interviews.
Yeah, it's building trust with that person so that you then, I think of it as like a debit, right? So
Sure.
like you're building up the deposits so that you can then have that tough conversation. It seems like concise, factual, and like you said, with kind of either a joyful spirit or a loving heart, which allows you to have...
with empathy, with humanity. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd say that the other thing too is that I had to learn over the years is ask the question the viewer is like screaming at the TV, you know, because they're watching an interview. Think like, if I was watching this interview, what would I be like? Wait, why are you asking this? Mm-hmm. Put yourself in the shoes of the viewer.
That's a good tip. You've interviewed all these incredible people, and like now I need to like rewind back to the Howard Schultz moment. Yeah. What's been your like most memorable or favorite interview that you've done?
Oh, that has been one of the greatest gifts of this career, and why I'm so deeply grateful to CNN for, I mean, they gave me like almost 20 years of an incredible opportunity to have a front row seat to history. It sounds cliche, but it is so true. So through my time there, I'd say 3. Can I pick 3? Mm-hmm. Warren Buffett, Jay-Z, and the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Those are good ones.
They all taught me so much. My first interview with Warren Buffett was 2008-9, that time frame, in the middle of the financial crisis in this country. And I was going out to cover a conference in California. And my then boss said to me at the time, by the way, Warren Buffett's going to be there. Get an interview with him. I'm like, I'm never going to get an interview with Warren Buffett. He doesn't know who I am. He doesn't talk to that many like people. He has sort of certain journalists that he usually does his interviews with. He doesn't know me from Adam. Like, okay. But I went up to him at the conference at a dinner, actually, which could have gone both ways, right? He could have been like, why are you bothering me at dinner? And I said, I'm Poppy. You don't know me, but can I have 5 minutes tomorrow? And he said, yes, meet me outside this conference room. So I met him in the hallway outside that conference room. I had the camera crew was there ready. And I think we got about 10 minutes, and he made so much news in that interview because he and Berkshire were very involved in sort of helping companies in the middle of the financial crisis and involved with the government's role, et cetera. So that was the beginning of a long, trusting, professional relationship with Warren Buffett. And I got to interview him, I don't know, 10 times since then. And then my last long interview with him was days after the 2016 election, where he again made so much news. It was absolutely fascinating to get his take. And so that was just a joy and an honor and a privilege. Jay-Z is someone I admire a lot. And I got to interview him a couple of times over the years. And he's someone where you just deeply listen. I was so impressed with obviously his business acumen, his creativity, his personal journey, and the story that he came from. And I loved those conversations. And then finally, Justice Ginsburg, I was able to interview 5 days postpartum after I had Luca.
Oh my gosh.
Which is not me saying I recommend you go back to work to women after giving birth. I don't. This was a one-off. But I got called to do that interview while I was pregnant. And they said, okay, the interview's February 12th. And I said, well, I'm due, Luca's due like the 6th. So I guess it was 6 days postpartum. And I said no. And my husband heard, and he came in the room and he's like, did you just say no to interviewing RBG? I was like, yeah, because I'm going to have Luca. I can't be a bad mom and leave. He's like, Poppy, the interview's uptown. Like, it's in New York City. Like, I can feed the baby, call them back and do the interview. So I called them back and I said, as long as Luca's healthy and everyone's okay, like, I would be honored to do it. And so kudos to my husband for that. Mm-hmm. And going into that interview, the greatest lesson about conversation that I learned was you have to be uncomfortable in the silence. She's famous for taking these like really long pauses. And there's sort of urban legend that her clerks, her law clerks, had this 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi rule before they would respond, because she might say something brilliant on the other side of a long pause. So I practiced that in the mirror. And during the interview, I just sat there in the uncomfortable silence. And it was true. At the end of a couple seconds, she said something even more brilliant, And so I remember, by the way, I was wearing a size large Rent the Runway skirt because you still look pregnant 5 days after giving birth. Yes. So I'll never thank you, Rent the Runway, for that.
Silence is, again, I think a leadership tool. You can use it professionally, certain personally. You actually have gone to law school. So
one year, Amber. I did a master's in law. Don't give me a credit for a full
tell us
GD.
what that was.
Okay.
Tell us what it was.
But your question was silence is a...
Well, I was going to say, when you don't agree with someone, Linda Yaccarino, who is the CEO of X, had agreed to come on to More to Say, and she was supposed to be here today, but she pulled out of the event that we're a part of. And I had done a lot of research on her, and what I found was that journalists are very combative with her, like to the point of actually sometimes being a little evil, if I'm being honest. Like it was a little painful to watch a lot of her interactions. So I've seen that end of things, but reason I brought up law is because you might have had a perspective or disagreed potentially even, or been informed enough to disagree with RBG or even with these others that you have interviewed over time. Certainly you're not aligned with every single person that's put in front of your plate, in the same way we as humans, whether it's our family at Thanksgiving or, a friend who's chosen a different path or whatever, we don't always agree. And I'm so curious, like, how do you manage disagreement in conversation?
Do you know who Justice Ginsburg's best friend on the court was? Justice Antonin Scalia. They could not have had more different views. They could not have gone more different of ways in their opinions on pretty much every big issue. But they were dear friends. And she is famous for saying, you can disagree without being disagreeable. I actually had a number of combative interviews during my time at CNN coming up, and I regret them. I regret them because I thought in the moment that I was doing the right thing for the viewer. And I thought that, they would go like, do you remember during the 2016 election and, these contentious political interviews with a number of different interviewers would go viral. And I think honestly, it made me feel like I was doing the right thing if something went viral. And I don't think that's right. I'm not saying I asked the wrong questions. I stand by the questions I ask, but I do think there are times when I could have asked them much differently. And I could have just been silent through the answer and then just re-ask them. Respectfully, you didn't answer my question, so I'd like to ask it again. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do now. That's what I do now. Right. But I just wish that I had known that, 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we all have this journey of learning, but you've got to admit to what you could have done better to get better.
Taking a quick break to tell you about one of my most fabulous finds. I just got a new pair of Citizens of Humanity denim that's a little bit high-waisted, has a little bit of a vintage feel, very fitted through the hips, and then has an ultra wide leg. They have a beautiful silhouette. They're stunning. I've been wearing them all over LA. I continue to get stopped and asked if I can give them the name of the denim, any sizing information. It's all on my LTK at Amber Vin's box. This is probably the most important thing I've added to my wardrobe the entire summer. I'm so excited to use this through fall. Check them out. Be sure you size down. All the information on my LTK at Amber Vin's box.
Do you think about the role? I think that we're coming out of an era of outrage economy.
And you think we're coming out of it?
Well, I hope we are. I hope so. I'll tell you why I think we're coming out of it, but maybe we're not. Because social media plays to outrage because it shows the content when people are sharing the content, and outrageous content gets shared more, right?
Sure.
And so I think that both socially we see people making outrageous choices to get attention, even in real life, or you see this, whether it's a host deciding that that's going to be the way that they grow their own fame is by being outrageous. In the mornings while I'm putting my makeup on, I listen to almost every news, like their podcast.
Yeah.
So
That's
in
great.
the morning, I'm like, hey, Siri, play the news. And I have it where she goes through everyone. It goes through CNN. It goes through Fox and all the stuff. And CNN has switched to now saying it's like the positive news. And it like just flipped. It's like in the last like day or so.
Great.
And it's like all this world news that's just like,
I love this.
Yes, I love this. And I've noticed on other stations too, where they're starting to have this moment of like great things in the world, because it's like, oh my God, everything is so
heavy
and draining and outrageous. And I think about even, personal conversations when you're, again, back to what Eleanor Roosevelt said, when you're talking about people or events. I find myself sometimes like showing even outrage in a one-to-one conversation. Can you believe this event or this person said this thing? And I'm wondering how you think like positivity in conversation, how does that either make the participant in the conversation either feel good about the interaction or negative about the interaction?
Well, I think a lot about the word joy. And I think joy is different than happiness. I think happiness is more surface level, but I think joy is deeper within us. And I've been on a journey of like finding that joy. And it's part of like my professional journey, knowing that it was time to leave CNN, but being so grateful for everything that it had given me, because I have wanted to take some risks professionally and explore my own joy and family joy. We're moving to Paris with our kids, as you know, in a couple of weeks. And so I think about how can we leave the people we interact with a little bit more joy than they came into the conversation. And I know that might sound impossible in difficult conversations, but if you can reaffirm someone about the things that are great within them, even when you have to deliver difficult news, they may not feel it at the time, but I do think that helps build up their joy of self, if that makes sense. And asking them, tell me more to say. It's never a bad idea to say, tell me about that, and just sit in it and listen to them, because they're going to feel heard. And everyone truly, at the end of the day, I believe, just wants to be heard. And I also think that's at the core of a lot of our political divide. We're not listening to each other.
It's incredible. I've seen that play out, what you just described. Everyone just wants to be heard. Now that we live in a small town, I interact with people more intimately than I would have in Dallas. So for example, I never saw who dropped my packages off on my porch in Dallas, because that's not a social interaction. Like people stay inside their house. Somebody drops it, rings the doorbell, and leaves. There's not the expectation of like a relationship. And this is just one example, but for example, the man, Luis, which I love you, Luis, who brings my packages to my house at the ranch, like we have conversations. I know what's going on in his life and with his family, and I bring him water. And it's rewarding to me to see and hear Luis. And I think that I hope that on the other end too, it's a positive interaction with him. But I think it goes down to even like children too. I've started to try and apply that to, my children, or Birdie, of like, I think that I'm seeing this from you, or you're acting this way, or you're telling me XYZ thing. So I think it's across the spectrum. And I was trying to give examples of degrees of relationships, and also I think across the age gap. I was going to ask you about like recipe, like pocket things that you can ask and say, because it's hard to know how a conversation is going to go, especially if you're new to conversation. One tip you gave was like, tell me more. Are there other sort of like back pocket tricks that we can bring into conversation to help them to continue?
Sure. I think definitely listen more than you speak, right? What do they say? God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Listen more than you speak. I think it's a sign of respect to go, and you're so good at this. You're such a preparer. Like you said, you really prepared for the Linda conversation that was going to happen. Any conversation you're going to have outside of like your family or friends, any professional conversation or interview you're doing. I've been talking to a lot of business leaders in the last couple of months, figuring out what's next for me in my journey. And I spend as much time preparing for those conversations or Zooms or in-person meetings as I would for a CNN interview. Like hours. I will listen to their podcasts that they've been on. I will watch videos. I will go through their sort of like if they have a social presence. And you can tell off the bat that they feel seen, like you're not wasting their time because you've taken the time to learn about them. And then that causes you to ask more meaningful questions. Or I read that you said this, and I wonder how you think about that now. There's a great, I love how Scott Pelley on 60 Minutes again asks, you'll notice he often asks, I wonder why that is. Or I wonder how that made you feel. Wonder, synonymous with curiosity, and everyone wants to feel like you are curious about what they have to say. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if you could tell me more, or how did that make you feel? Right.
Well, that's a powerful tool. When you are with someone, in your professional capacity, often I would imagine you don't know them personally. Of course, we all come across others, whether, I will tell you, like, there's cousins I haven't seen in years. So when I sit down at the dinner table with them, it's kind of like meeting a new person because I don't know what's going on in their life. Like, how do you make people feel comfortable and open up when, especially like I think about birthday get-togethers, weddings, you're stuck at a table with people you haven't seen in a long time. Like, how do you make people feel comfortable and open up?
Compliment them. It's like we tell our kids, like, find something nice to say. So whether and I'm not saying make it up, but I'm saying if you like what they're wearing, say that. If you liked an interview you just saw them do, say that. If you heard something nice about them from a mutual friend, say that. Like, first of all, compliment them, make them feel sort of seen and respected. And then start out with, even if they ask about you, I would suggest flipping the script and saying, I can't wait to tell you about that, but I've just been dying to ask you this. Because again, that gets them talking about themselves. Mm-hmm. That's my advice.
Yeah. You have to really, I think, keep that radar on of like, am I talking? I use that, I know, as a tool to fill space when someone's not very talkative. Like, we had a guest over who's very reserved. And so to fill a whole dinner conversation with someone who's not playing ping pong can be very challenging. Right. And sometimes I then just start talking about myself or whatever's going on.
Because you're trying to make them not feel uncomfortable, right?
Yes. But I need to find a way to still get them to double click into things I know that are going on in their life.
Yeah.
Oh, man. What do you do when it goes off the rails? Personally, professionally, conversations can go south in a hurry.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they can. They can go south. They can get contentious and angry. What I do now is different than what I think I did, years ago, which we talked about. If someone gets angry in an interview, you don't have to meet them where they are. Isn't it always the person that keeps their cool that wins in the end? Like, always. And that's hard to do. But like, if they raise their voice, you don't need to raise your voice. Or actually, if they make an accusation against you or whatever, like, if you're silent, that's like, there's so much power in silence. Interviews can also go south if there's an emotion you didn't expect. And maybe not go south is the right word, but interviews can also surprise you if there's an emotion you don't expect. Like, if someone starts crying and gets very emotional, like, what do you do? And that's when I think you have to lead with compassion and, lean over to them. Some journalists don't agree with this. So I will lean over and like touch someone's shoulder or their knee or whatever is like comfortable, because that's what I would do as a human to another human, even a stranger. So for me, that's just, I think some journalists would say that's breaking a boundary. You just have to make your own choice, but like, give them a tissue, offer them a break. Mm-hmm. Do you want to take 5 minutes? Because like, that's the compassionate human thing to do. And they will, I think, forever remember and cherish the fact that you honored them in their like very difficult moment. Mm-hmm.
Something I've started to articulate, I had a friend who shared with me recently that she had a pretty serious diagnosis. And I have to process information and process my ideas and then come back the following day. And I sort of left the situation kind of abruptly. And then the following day came back and I had to sort of explain myself of like, I slept on it. This is kind of what I meant to say. I think it's a tool that you can still use to say, I want to process and respond to this. So I guess what I'm sharing is I think I need to be more upfront with, it's okay to not have the right reaction in a minute of like, let me process that.
Yes.
And come back to you with some thoughts. Because I had very clear thoughts the next day that were, I think, super valuable. But in the moment, it was a train wreck.
So did you say anything, or you just like weren't proud of what you said?
I didn't feel like it. I didn't communicate any wisdom at all. I was very sad, and I I left and started sobbing. But I'm like, should I have shown that to her, or like, was I supposed to be strong for her? And I really didn't know how to act. But I feel like if I was to do that over again, I think I would just express, hey, I'd have to take time to process things. So let's have another conversation tomorrow.
And did you go back to her?
I did, yes.
Okay.
And I wrote it all out. It's one of those things where you subconscious, like in your dreams, you almost like have that conversation, like formulate the things. And so I just like woke up with the answer and I was like, these are my 3 reactions to this. And so I was able to go back with her to make it right. But I guess my point in this rambling is that I think it is okay to say, let me process or let me think about that, or not give answers in the moment, or kind of excuse yourself rather than filling space with something you wouldn't want to.
I think that is not only right, but I think it's also like the most respectful and giving thing you can do. I used to be someone who, and still have to fight the temptation, like, well, I love checklists and like checking everything off. So if I'll have a meeting with someone, I want to like right when we hang up or when I leave and get home or whatever, like send a follow-up email, like, thank you so much, I want to stay in touch, to like get it, it's done. Mm-hmm. What I've started doing is like writing myself a note to in a couple of days, write them a thank you. I'm a big fan, by the way, of handwritten thank you letters. Warren Buffett taught me that. He sent me a thank you letter for our first interview, which is framed in my home office now. And from that day on, I was like, if Warren Buffett can write me a thank you letter for interviewing him, I better write thank you letters. So but I think I will wait a couple days now to email people to thank them, because I want to spend time thinking about what specifically I want to thank them for, what I want to write, where I could maybe be helpful to them. And so even to friends and people in the most difficult situations, taking a few days to process it, then maybe putting pen to paper. We have way too much just texting, or even putting pen to paper. And you're so good at this. Like I noticed this from the first time we met in Henry Crown, like you will write down like the points you want to like thoughtfully make. Mm-hmm. And you're not someone, I believe, who speaks to hear themselves speak, but just time, like just wait, pause on the email, pause on the note, pause on the call.
The LTK team has been so busy lately, launching tons of new products, and I wanted to make sure that you're aware of this newest one that I really love. When you open up the new LTK app, now at the top, you'll see profile bubbles of the different creators that you follow. You can click into any of those and catch up on all the videos that you've missed from that creator within the last 24 hours. Something I love so much as well is when you go to my LTK at Amber Vin's Box, click on my profile picture. It'll actually tell you how many of my videos that you've missed. You can click and watch them all in one spot. I'm loving all of this new video experience in the LTK app. I hope that you do as well.
Have you noticed that since the rise of work from home and virtual communication, any sort of changes in dynamics of conversations?
So I never had a like work from home Zoom career during COVID. We actually pretty much all the CNN journalists that were on air went into the office every day. So I didn't experience that, what so many workers did. Obviously not frontline essential workers, they were all in. But now I have much more from my home office and on Zoom, et cetera. So far, I actually have been able to and found Zoom rather intimate in a good way. I find when you go out to eat with someone and it's like an interview or a work thing, you're interrupted a lot from the, what am I going to order in the service and can I get the bill and all of that. And I also think Zoom, you kind of watch the time because it is set for amount of time in your calendar. And yesterday I had a Zoom with someone I really admire, half an hour, and I was really I tried to be really thoughtful with my questions, how long I spoke, how much I listened, because I knew that time was limited. I don't know. I sometimes think we waste people's time less over Zoom. There's less of the like 10 minutes of who's coming into the meeting room late, who's coming into the conference room late. I don't know. What do you like? You run a lot of your meetings now remotely.
Yes. It's certainly much more efficient. I've noticed with like different nannies that we've had that they were in high school. They were in college during COVID.
Okay.
And I noticed some social differences.
That they have a hard time going back into big environments.
It can be carrying on a conversation or social cues, or I mean, candidly, and I'll speak broader than just my one-to-one experience with candidates, but also it's like wardrobe choices, and which, there's obviously this huge nonverbal piece of communication that is such a tool that I have used my entire life because I was actually an introverted child, but I knew that if I learned like by first grade that like if I wore an outfit that my teachers liked, like I would get attention every day, but otherwise I didn't want to speak. And so I've like always used it as a tool. Like some people on my team joke, it's like my armor. But so that's not to be forgotten. But I noticed that with these women that are coming out of college, the same thing that they would wear on their Instagram or their TikTok is like how they're showing up to babysit my children.
Right.
And
you're like,
this isn't what people actually wear. Like the crop top with like the crazy whatever is like not what's, and so it's almost like there are some struggles with conversation that I've noticed, a lot of introverted behavior, like want to spend a lot of time alone or just, not catching the nonverbal cues.
Do you remember the great scene in The Devil Wears Prada movie where the woman, the editor of the magazine, is talking about the different shades of blue? And it was about the importance of fashion because the assistant at that time was sort of thinking like, well, fashion is, like light and not important and this and that. It was just like this brilliant scene. And it made me think completely differently about how we present ourselves really matters, both for how I feel about myself and also for like as a sign of respect of who we're going to meet with,
Mm-hmm.
We should rewatch that scene together. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, it's important. I definitely try to dress for my audience. If you're on YouTube right now, you can see what I'm wearing, but I have a speech later today at kind of a whimsical conference.
You look amazing.
And I told them to put turquoise eyeliner on, which I think is very fun and cool. But I'm looking out the window at this event. I'm like, it's a
LA,
carnival.
Palm trees. It's a carnival. Exactly.
But I definitely am not wearing this to pitch a new client. I will say. So read the room. It's interesting though with kids. My kids, I don't even know how they found out about these games that are online. Like think about like Roblox, Minecraft.
Yeah.
I'm like, I didn't tell you about them. Like, how did you get to this?
Yeah.
But they love it so much. And I was reading a New York Times article that talked about how the social strata of the next generation, like social class, will be defined by your ability to carry on an interesting conversation. And it was saying how...
Will you send that to me? I want to read it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's another like knife through the heart where you're like, oh, wake up call. Because it was saying that entertainment is now free. So think about like you can sit on TikTok all day. You can sit on Shorts all day. Like name your platform. They want to snap each other. I say they because it's like, I'm not doing that, but other people are. Yeah. And my daughter's asking for Snap because she likes the filters and all this. Anyway, free entertainment, lots of screen time. That's time that they're not developing the skill set. So it's like numbing their ability to communicate in real life. And it's also showing them like my 8-year-old, she's watching on Minecraft, this like fashion game, and they have like crazy hair. And then she wants to like go to church with like 10 ponytails out her head and like purple lipstick. I'm like, read the room. Yeah. But, so anyway, what I've started to do practically for my kids is if they want screen time, I actually make them, and this is like a tip for everyone, I make them have a conversation with me and they have to ask at least 10 questions.
I love this.
It's really actually a fun way to engage with kids.
I'm going to try this.
So I will assume a character and then they have to ask me at least like 10 questions. So
like this a Disney character or what?
Oh, no, I like make up funny people because I'm like, who are they going to pass? And so, it starts by like shaking hands and saying who your name is or whatever. And then there's a funny one the other day where I played the role of just like a grumpy individual that lived at home with his dad. And so we were getting down the line with Birdie. She's almost to her 10th question, which unlocks Minecraft.
Yeah.
And she asked, well, where do you live? And I said, well, I live at home with my dad, but he has all these chickens and they're too loud. And I was so proud of her because she said, so are you going to move out or get rid of the chickens?
That's amazing.
She was like, it's working. Like she's,
that is
she's
such
actually
a creative, great idea. And again, you're asking, you're training her to ask questions and then to listen.
Yes. Tell me about active listening, because that's really what I felt like she had achieved with the, are you going to move out or get rid of the chickens question? But tell us a little bit about active listening. Like, what is that? How do you apply?
So, like, I believe that, like, et cetera, is affirming to people because it shows you're listening, or eye contact or nodding, or like, oh yeah, like hand gestures are really affirming to people. And actually, on Zoom, on big Zoom meetings, when you're on mute, when everyone's on mute except for the speaker, you don't get that. So that can feel a little, or, when people have to unmute and then respond, it can feel like, did they not like what I said? Did they not agree? And that's just because of the technology, because you're not in person. Totally. So I do think active listening is much easier in person. But I remember I would do it in interviews, and I had some producers who, they weren't wrong, would be like, because I think in TV it can come across as distracting, but I would be just trying to tell the interviewee that I was like listening, but then, that would come up on the mic. And anyways, the point is, I don't know. I kept doing it, I guess, because it felt like I wanted them to feel heard. And I don't know if it's the best in like a TV interview, but definitely in other interviews, just affirming someone vocally or with hand gestures or your eyes goes a long way. Oh, and then repeating back to them, like, I'm hearing you say this, this, and this, or that's really interesting that you said X, and then moving on to the next thing.
What would you say, I guess, as we wrap up, are kind of the key takeaways that in this, what I'm going to describe as a masterclass in conversation that people can start employing today? Well, I think that honestly, we're taking your decades worth of knowledge and experience and boiling it down to where I hope to leave this today. I have many more social interactions throughout the day and throughout the week and weekend. How do I apply those in my real life? Like, what are those key points that you think we hit today?
So I would say 3 things. One, I would always come back to people just want to be heard. And I would go farther than saying just want to be heard. I would say people deserve to be heard. Everyone. The second thing that I would say is something we haven't talked about yet, which is proximity. So, and you can be proximate without being sitting next to someone. Brian Stevenson, the great sort of equal rights and justice attorney who runs the Equal Justice Initiative, who's worked to get, many wrongly convicted people out of jail. He talks about why he's dedicated his whole life to this. And he talks about being proximate to the pain. I think you need to be proximate to the pain, proximate to the joy, close to the person. And the way you get that way is by learning about them. So whether it's the research you've done before you sit down for the interview, you're automatically closer to them because you've put in your work. Whether you are listening more than you're talking, you become closer to them. So just being proximate is really says a lot. And then I guess I'd leave us with the most important thing is always remember the humanity of the person on the other side of the conversation. Even if you so vehemently disagree with them, always remember the humanity. I so admire the late Senator John McCain. And I will never forget when he was running against President Obama. There was someone in a crowd at a rally who said something untrue about, I think it was then candidate Obama. And John McCain stopped, and he was running against him for president. And he stopped and he said, essentially, and I'm paraphrasing here, like, that's not true. He's a good man. And he saw the humanity, even in politics. Remember when it used to be like that? He saw the humanity. And I think if we can all try to see the humanity in the person sitting across from us, we will be in a much better place personally, and our country will be in a much better place. So proximity, be proximate, humanity, and people deserve to be heard.
This is incredible. Thank you, Poppy. I have chills. I'm so excited about this filter. I mean, for people to feel seen, heard. And I think it allows you to have a better conversation with them when you can try to be empathetic and understand their life circumstance and meet them where they are. And everyone wants to be asked about their life and their experiences, and how rewarding personally too, to be able to have the power to make someone feel good. So I so appreciate you being here. Thank you for teaching all of us your decades worth of learning.
This was a joy. And you're great at this.
Thanks, Poppy.
Truly. Keep it going. Thank you, Amber.
Based on my conversation with Poppy, I've put together 10 guidelines for things that she mentioned today of how we can all have more successful interactions with other people. You can find all of these in the show notes where you can take a screenshot, keep them in your phone book. 1, listen actively. 2, stay curious. 3, be sure to treat others with respect and courtesy. 4, stay on topic. Please don't chase rabbits. 5, be mindful of the nonverbal cues. 6, avoid dominance. Like Poppy said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. 7, build on your shared interest. 8, be authentic. 9, stay positive. And then 10, reflect on your interactions and think back through where you might have stepped outside of these boundaries of the 10 that we just talked through. You can listen to More to Say on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And I'd love to hear from you. Share your comments and questions in the reviews section, or you can reach out to me at Amber Vinsbox on LTK, Instagram, and of course, LinkedIn.